Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all those listening. This is my first episode of Echoes of Empires. Um, our first story for today is one of myth. It is the story of Romulus and Remus, how two brothers were able to create a nation. Well, one brother, but we'll get into that. This is a new YouTube channel. I don't really know what the fuck I'm doing here. I'm editing this as I'm learning how to edit. So sorry if it's a little, I don't know, underdeveloped or lack of good production. But at the end of the day, what matters is the content. And I put a lot of effort into making this story and giving everybody a very detailed and nuanced perspective on it. So I hope you enjoy, and here you go. The story of Romulus and Remus begins with their grandfather, Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa, a city founded by descendants of Trojan refugees. Yeah, Romans believed their bloodline traced back to Troy. Now, Numitor had a younger brother, Amulius. Amulius wasn't so fond of the idea that his older brother was king, but he never openly challenged Numitor's position as king. He was slow and strategic. He didn't look for a legal maneuver or take a political vote. He had supporters, and through a coup, he seized the throne, allowing his brother to live, but stripping him of authority, leaving Numitor powerless. Now, Numitor had sons, who of course were a threat to Amulius. These were potential kings. Amulius had them killed, cutting off the threat of being usurped by these potential kings. So even if Numitor could find support, there would be no male heir to rally behind. Numitor was still alive, but politically, he was dead. Now all that was left of Numitor's lineage was Rhea Silvia. She was still a threat to Amulius' throne, not as you might be thinking. Remember, Rhea Silvia was a woman. She herself couldn't rule Alba Longa. But her children could. So Amulius forced her to become a Vestal Virgin. You might be asking yourself, what even is a Vestal Virgin? Well, Vestal Virgins were priestesses, devoted to the goddess Vesta. These women were sworn into lifelong chastity. Their primary duty was to tend to the sacred fire of Vesta. At that time, the Romans believed that if the flame went out, Rome itself was in danger. They were considered essential to the survival of the state. Now, how does forcing Rhea Silvia into becoming a Vestal Virgin help Amulius? Well, forcing her into religious service looked pious and lawful, and from his perspective, no children meant no heirs to the throne. Numitor's lineage was finished. Now, with Numitor sidelined, his sons dead, and Rhea Silvia unable to produce any heirs, Amulius ruled Alba Longa as king. He presented himself as a stabilizer, as the man who brought order after the internal conflict, but his rule rested entirely on fear, not loyalty, and fear creates cracks. Amulius underestimated one thing: the gods. Rhea Silvia gave birth to twins, claiming they were fathered by Mars, the god of war. Now, the interaction between Mars and Rhea Silvia isn't so straightforward, but we have a couple of versions of that encounter which are pretty dark. It wasn't gentle or romantic in the modern sense, but it was necessary for the creation of Rome. The version that Rome preferred was that Mars appears to Rhea Silvia, sometimes in a sacred grove, sometimes near a spring, sometimes in a dream. It doesn't really matter where, because this was an act of divine intervention and not a seduction in the human sense. You see, Rhea Silvia doesn't choose Mars. He claims her. The birth of the twins is destined, not accidental. This version of the story protects Rome's legitimacy. You see, if Rome's founder was born from Mars, then Rome is a city of warriors by divine right. Now, some ancient writers state that Mars overpowered Rhea Silvia. The words used in Latin sources are deliberately vague, but often imply force. This fits a broader pattern in Greco-Roman myths in which gods frequently take what they want, especially when fate is involved. This interpretation adds tragedy to the story and makes the king's reaction more understandable. This event, of course, puts the king in a bind. He couldn't just execute her without angering the gods, and disbelieving her meant accusing a Vestal of lying and challenging divine will. And accepting her claims still didn't solve the problem of the children. His first move was to imprison her. This removed her from the public eye and stripped her of any remaining influence this satisfied. Religious outrage without creating a martyr. But imprisonment wasn't enough. When Romulus and Remus were born, Amulius made his most critical decision yet. He ordered them to be killed immediately. Not secretly adopted, exiled, or raised as hostages. Dead. But again, he avoided direct bloodshed. He commanded that the infants be placed in a basket and thrown into the Tiber River. This wasn't mercy, it was strategy. Letting the river kill them shifted responsibility to fate. If the gods truly favored the children, they would survive. If not, Amulius could claim his innocence. It seems pretty reckless to send the twins on a little boat ride down the river, but it really isn't. By doing this, he can avoid offending the gods while still preserving his power. He just underestimated destiny. He created the very conditions for his downfall. Now, what was left of Rhea? Well, depending on the version, she remained imprisoned, was executed, or was later cast into the river and transformed into a spirit. In all versions, her role ended the moment the heirs were born. At this time, it's believed the Tiber River was flooded, but instead of the current dragging the basket to the depths, it gently carried them downstream and left the basket stranded at the base of the Palatine Hill. The gods had intervened. The basket came to rest near a sacred cave called the Lupercal, which is already associated with fertility and protection. This wasn't a random location in Roman religion. Sacred places acted as gateways between divine will and human life, and reaching this cave meant the twins were under sacred protection. The twins wouldn't survive on their own. A she-wolf discovered the crying infants, and instead of eating them, which seems more logical, she nursed them. This is the most famous image of the myth, and it's loaded with symbolism. Wolves symbolized both savagery and guardianship, underscoring that Rome was a city raised by the wild. Some ancient writers hint at the fact that she-wolf, in Latin lupa, could also mean a marginalized woman, but Roman tradition embraced the literal wolf because it reinforced the idea that nature itself raised Rome's founders. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus discovered the twins. Instead of reporting them to the king, he decided to raise them as his own alongside his wife, Acca Larentia, committing an act of quiet disobedience. He knew the risk, but he chose protection over fear. The twins grew up among shepherds, learning survival, violence, leadership, and loyalty. They were raised as fighters, not prints. From the start, the twins stood out. They weren't just strong, they commanded loyalty. They led groups of young men, fighting off bandits and rival shepherds, settling disputes by force. They had earned a reputation as natural leaders. But simply being shepherds would never have led them to become the founders of a great nation. Conflict soon struck when Remus was captured by shepherds loyal to Amulius, accusing him of cattle theft and disorder. Instead of executing him on the spot, he was brought before the old, deposed King Numitor, who held a position akin to that of a judge. Now, at this moment, Numitor could tell something was strange about the young Remus, but didn't quite realize his grandson. Back at the shepherd camp, Faustulus realized what had happened to Remus. Fearing Remus would be killed, he finally told Romulus the truth about who he really was. He spoke of his mother, his grandfather, and why they were thrown into the river. Romulus gathered supporters and marched on Alba Longa. It wasn't an act of rebellion, it was a reckoning. Romulus and his followers stormed the city and killed King Amulius. It's left unclear who dealt the final blow, but Amulius fell the same way he rose, by violence. And Numitor? He was restored as king. In Roman terms, justice had been served. That's right, Romulus and Remus didn't stay to rule Alba Longa. They had everything they needed to rule, but wanted something different. They had returned to the place where they were abandoned, the riverbank, the hills, the cave, and decided to build a new city from nothing. But building a city comes with a whole new set of problems. The twins argued over where the city should be built, who should rule it, how authority should be decided. They turned to Auguri, reading signs from birds. Remus stood on the Aventine hill and first saw 6 vultures. In Augural tradition, who receives the sign first was correct. Remus claimed that the god spoke to him first, meaning that he was chosen. But on the Palatine Hill stood Romulus, who had later saw 12 vultures. In augury, number and strength outweighed timing. Romulus claimed that the gods gave him a stronger sign, but augury only worked when one authority interprets the sign. And in this case, 2 men had performed augury, and each had a personal stake in the outcome. So the ritual didn't resolve conflict, it formalized it. Now, this event carries a deeper meaning in Roman belief. Vultures were associated with founding and destiny. They were also thought to appear only where fate demanded it. Seeing vultures wasn't just approval, It meant this place matters. In this sense, Remus represented procedural legitimacy. He had seen the vultures first in Auguri. He was just in his belief. But Romulus represented power legitimacy. He had seen more vultures. Rome chose Romulus. This tells you exactly what kind of civilization Rome believed it was. Romulus had made his decision. Rome would be built on the Palatine Hill. Romulus began building walls, but Remus still disagreed and mocked his brother. He ended up jumping over the wall. He wasn't committing a simple prank. This act was considered sacrilege. You see, in Roman beliefs, a city wall wasn't just a physical boundary. It was a sacred line. Crossing it meant Remus rejects the god's approval, denying the city's legitimacy and declaring that the foundation ritual had failed. So when Remus leapt over the wall, he symbolically said, "This city has no divine protection. These boundaries mean nothing." That's not mockery. That's treason against a city that doesn't even exist yet. So Romulus killed Remus. How is unclear. Some say Romulus did the deed. Some say he ordered his men to kill Remus. And an even rarer version states that Remus was killed during a riot due to an escalation between the supporters of each twin. Bottom line, Remus was killed, and not framed as an accident, but a statement. No one crosses Rome's walls and lives. Romulus, well, he continued to build his city and named it Rome after himself and became its first king. Still, the city was weak at first. They had few people, almost all men, and most were exiles and runaways. Hence, he did something radical. He opened Rome as a sanctuary for outsiders, criminals, debtors, and escaped slaves. Rome didn't ask who you were. It asked if you were willing to belong. Rome grew, but still had a big problem. They had no women. So how did Romulus act? He invited neighboring tribes, including the Sabines, to a festival. During the celebration, Roman men seized the women and carried them off. War soon followed, but it ended unexpectedly. The women themselves stood between the armies, now wives and mothers, begging fathers and husbands to stop fighting. Peace was made, and the tribes merged. Rome survived, not by purity, but by absorption. Years later, Romulus ruled as lawgiver and war leader. One day during a public assembly, a violent storm broke out. When it passed, Romulus was gone. No body, no grave. The story states that he was taken by the gods and became Quirinus, a divine protector of Rome. Whether he vanished or was he killed, it doesn't matter. What matters is how Romans remember Romulus. Romulus did not die like a man. Hey, so I know that turned out way more different than it began. So I just want to make it clear that my whole purpose with this channel is to maintain it pretty playful, and I'm going to continue doing that. I know some of it was kind of unhinged, but It's what I do. I fuck around. So I really hope you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun doing this. And my next video's on Vietnam. Oh yeah, and one last thing. Please like